Hello, respected viewers. I'm George from Ireland. So I'm going to be talking about the border crisis in between Belarus and various European Union member states, namely Poland, Latvia, and Lithuania. So a bit of geography. Belarus is in Eastern Europe. It borders those three countries I just mentioned, as well as Ukraine and Russia. So Belarus, meaning like white Russia, it was part of the Soviet Union for centuries, and Belarus was really only a distinct entity within the Soviet Union from the 1920s. So they can all speak Russian. They've also got their own Belarusian language as well. So it's been ruled by Alexander Lukashenko since 1994, and he just has won his sixth consecutive presidential election, but this time by massive scale fraud, by outlawing candidates who he thought were a significant threat to him, by jailing tens of thousands of protesters, and by total control of the media. Unsurprisingly, that election in August 2020 was not accepted by most Belarusian people, but he rules by fear there. And many reform-minded Belarusians have moved abroad. But there have been sanctions on Belarus imposed by the European Union and the United States because of his crackdown. Now, people say it's brutal, and it is, but let's get this in perspective. Not that many people have been killed by security forces, since then. I'm thinking a dozen in the last year and some odd months. And he's probably murdered some of his political opponents over the last 27 years. The last dictatorship in Europe, he's openly said he's a dictator. Belarus lost a third of its population in the Second World War. A third. You put that in perspective. The United Kingdom often thinks it had it bad in the Second World War, which lost 1% of its population in the Second World War. So huge numbers of civilians were massacred by the Third Reich, by the Nazis. And yet Alexander Lukashenko has effusively praised Adolf Hitler. That's a measure of what Lukashenko is like. Now, Lukashenko doesn't know who his father is, but he puts a story about that his father was killed in the Second World War, in which case Lukashenko's mother must have been pregnant not for 9 months, but for 9 years. Now, it doesn't reflect any discredit on Alexander Lukashenko that his parents weren't married or anything like that, but it's just showing that the sort of mistruth that he peddles. So he's been deeply unhappy with what European Union countries have been doing to him. So Belarus is a fairly poor country. It exports potash. I didn't even know what that was till a few months ago. An essential ingredient in fertilizer, and various things of that nature. A little bit of oil, coal, gas, tractors, one of their few manufactured products, potatoes. It's not a wealthy country, so often its intelligentsia moved abroad. There's been a brain drain. Like Putin, he's happy to see them go, because these are people who will be likely dissentients. So in 1999, Belarus signed a union treaty with Russia, agreeing to reunite. Lukashenko was in charge, Yeltsin was president of the Russian Federation at that time. But since then, he's stalled and stalled. He's been receiving cut-price energy from Russia for decades, and the Russians are increasingly exacerbated with his antics, with his not making good on this promise to reunite. But anyway, he's frustrated because his economy has been hit by these EU sanctions. Remember, he forcibly grounded a Ryanair plane, which was flying from Greece to Lithuania. When it crossed over Belarusian airspace, he made a completely spurious claim that there was a bomb on board, had to be grounded immediately so they could search it. It was really just to arrest a Belarusian dissident journalist and his girlfriend, who've not been free since. And the man was obviously beaten in custody. He was clumsily covered up with makeup. Anyway, so this is a country where the slightest word of dissent can see you spending several years in a horrible prison. Even those Belarusians who've called for reunification of Russia, which was Lukashenko's own policy, have been imprisoned. So it's just telling you how bad it is. Lukashenko was someone who was an outspoken admirer of the late Libyan tyrant Muammar al-Gaddafi. And there was even rumours that Gaddafi had sought asylum in Belarus. Well, he obviously didn't make it. Gaddafi used to say to the European Union, you better not undermine me, because I'm holding back all of these illegal immigrants who would like to cross Mare Nostrum and seek asylum in the European Union. The European Union being one of the wealthiest zones in the world. If you come from Senegal or Chad or wherever it is, you're far better off being poor in an EU country than being maybe even middle class in many African countries. So Lukashenko realized this is a sensitive issue. A lot of refugees came from Syria and other countries in 2015 onwards. The EU struggled to cope with these people, to integrate them, to provide them with public services. There was some backlash, but people felt there was far too much illegal immigration. So Lukashenko decided to weaponize some desperate people who were seeking asylum. So you have to get a visa to go to Belarus if you're from anywhere other than the former Soviet country. But in the summer of 2021, Belarusian estate agents were told that visas would be issued very easily, and indeed they were. And a lot more flights were going there from the Middle East. Tours to Belarus. Iraqi Airways increased its number of flights. So bringing in a lot of refugees from Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. There were no direct flights from Afghanistan, but indirectly, people from various countries like Algeria, Ethiopia, and on and on. Not because they wanted to go to Minsk, but to cross the border illegally, to just walk through the forest to Poland, Latvia, Lithuania. Now, these aren't the wealthiest EU countries, but once in the EU, you can really go anywhere. It's very difficult to stop you. So that happened, and hundreds of Iraqis said they were going on a hunting tour of Belarus, which was completely bogus. It was just because they wanted to cross over illegally. So they were actively facilitating this, knowingly, the Belarusian regime, and then going to the border. They were guided by the Belarusian military. We know all this because obviously hundreds managed to cross successfully and were subsequently detained in Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, and said, "So what happened?" And they gave chapter and verse on what was happening. The Belarusian border guard again told to expedite these illegal border crossings. Anyway, so for instance, people who crossed from Belarus to Lithuania illegally in 2020 were 81. All right, whereas in this year so far it's been over 4,200. So I'll say that again. So 81, from 81 up to 4,200. An enormous, about a 50-fold increase. So you said Belarus is a puppet state controlled by Putin. Well, there's to some extent. It's very economically dependent on Russia. If you're a Belarusian, you can move to Russia anytime without a visa and can do virtually anything in Russia. Join the army, get loans which only normally Russians can get. I'm not sure you can vote, though. That's a lot of people. Well, I mean, as I say, it's a 50-fold increase in 1 year. Now, that's no coincidence, and there's a similar story crossing the border illegally into Latvia and Poland. That's only counting those who get caught. Some of them will have crossed the border and evaded arrest, and others of them will not have been able to cross the border. So obviously it's alarming for Latvia and Lithuania, quite small countries. Bearing in mind Latvia's only got 2 million people. Now, a few thousand refugees they could cope with, tens of thousands they couldn't, because not being alarmist, this is certainly not racist. No, these aren't bad people for being any nationality or ethnicity. If I was in their situation, I'd probably cross the border illegally too, saying, "Oh, come on, it's a victimless crime. All I'm doing is seeking a better life in a safer country. NATO countries may have militarily intervened in my country, displacing me. Therefore, I should be allowed to seek asylum there." The Lithuanian government openly accused Minsk of actively encouraging that. I don't have a trace of an Irish accent. Well, people occasionally said it's vestigial in certain words, but you're probably correct. I have a public school accent, like received pronunciation. I've done videos on this. I'm sure you want elocution lessons. I know, isn't it trouble I don't have, isn't it, terribly troubling and dispiriting I don't have that mellifluous Hibernian accent. Anyhow, so a lot of people from Iraq and various African, Middle Eastern countries went across the border. So Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, they requested assistance from other EU member states. Tear gas was used to try and disperse people who were seeking to cross the border. And anyway, then border fences were built to try and keep people out. And anyway, the Lithuanian side said, the Belarusian side, they're firing bullets, we think blanks, tear gas to try and keep us back, the Lithuanian border guards. So making it more difficult to catch those who are crossing the border illegally. So Lukashenko's idea is this: I will penalise you, the European Union, by releasing illegal immigrants on you unless you terminate sanctions, because this is the one way I can hit you. Belarusian sanctions against EU countries, not very effective. It's dented the economies of even Latvia and Lithuania only slightly, because of course they trade with Belarus a bit. There is still commerce between the two countries, but not so much. there's been sanctions on certain exports. There's a pipeline, the Druzhba pipeline, which transports gas from Russia through Belarus and on into Poland and other EU countries. Druzhba meaning friendship in Russian. And because of the energy shortages we're going to this winter, the European Union is loath to cut that off, and they haven't. Now, Lukashenko has threatened to cut off gas sales, oil and coal sales to other EU countries. And they really don't want to lose out on that. But that would also damage Belarus's already battered economy, because they wouldn't be selling so much. And he's reliant on financial support from Russia, who's picking up the tab. Now, Russia might be kind of fed up of his antics and picking up the tab, but what's their alternative? If he's ousted, they're worried that a pro-Western leader might come to office. And Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, who won the presidential election, and she's been in exile in Lithuania ever since, she said that there should be tighter sanctions. But she's also said, she's not unfriendly to Russia, because she realizes if the Kremlin perceives her as hostile, they would never dream of her coming to office. I mean, they don't like Lukashenko, they find him exasperating, but it's better the devil you know. Lukashenko's got 3 sons. He thinks the eldest 2 are weaklings, he's openly said. Kolya, who's 17, he's supposedly groomed for succession. And Kolya, he had it through an affair with his personal female physician, and he used to bring him in all sorts of meetings to meet with all sorts of world leaders, sort of bring your child to work day permanently for Alexander Lukashenko over many years. Anyway, so it seems the border situation is somewhat under control. The European Union's got Frontex, its own border security force, and has sent extra officers to help these countries. I make it better the PM than the clown we got now. I know he's both buffoonish, oafish, cartoonish. Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson. The real highlight of his career is he's met me on several occasions, but the last time was over 20 years ago. So Poland was very worried about that, and building fences and things like that, releasing a lot of money, and some Poles were welcoming these refugees. They took pity on them, and so there's been backlash saying, oh, you can't do this, because then we'll have way more people that we can actually cope with. Anyway, so some people have died of exposure, illegal immigrants who are hiding out in the Belarusian forest without adequate clothing or shelter. Tents have been set up for them by the Belarusian army, so the Belarusians are definitely helping them. And then they're blaming the European Union for not giving these people asylum. Well, why don't they claim asylum in Belarus then? There's no civil war then. Well, you can only claim asylum if you get into the country, so the idea is don't let them into the country. The European Union's got 500 million people, and these people, I mean, sometimes they're coming from war-torn regions, sometimes they're not. But often they're illegal economic migrants. All right, all they want to do is get a job and build a better life. Completely understandable. They're not wicked for wanting to do that, but you've got to do the proper channel, go through the proper channels to get a visa, which is a real headache, and you might be refused one. If you can't speak a relevant language, don't have very high qualifications, not going to contribute a great deal economically. These countries, they've got some of their own employed people, and I know there are pros and cons for immigration. Obviously, I mean, it'd be crazy to be against all immigration. I want some immigration, but it's got to be a sensible amount, as many as you can absorb. Anyway, so it does seem to be winding down, although that's really not Lukashenko's style, and closing some of the camps, and some countries like Iraq have repatriated their nationals. A lot of flights have stopped. There are no more direct Iraqi flights there. Turkey has prevented some people from some nationalities from purchasing air tickets to Belarus, which might be catching some people who had no intention of crossing illegally. Ukraine has deployed soldiers on its border with Belarus in case some of them try to illegally immigrate through Ukraine. Not that Ukraine is an EU member state. Now, the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, has a completely different political style and background to Lukashenko, but they managed to have a cordial relationship until a few months ago. But after the Ryanair flight was forcibly down by Belarus, then Ukraine stopped flights to or from Belarus transiting its airspace, so relations between the two have soured. And there are several Russian military bases on there in Belarus. I mean, I would suspect what Russia would like is a managed transition to someone who's more acceptable to the Belarusian population, who's very much under Putin's thumb, and who would win acceptance by the international community. But how are they going to do that? It doesn't look like Lukashenko is going quietly anytime soon. Last year he dropped hints about this being his last term, but he would like to make sure he's not prosecuted, his family doesn't lose out financially, and roughly the same situation pertains, that he can remain as a backseat driver. So it's going to be a tall order to transition, especially as there's quite a lot of unrest. He's not going to be overthrown anytime soon. He's certainly got the situation under control. And it seems to me that the security forces, the KGB, they still call it that, Komitet Государственной безопасности, the Committee for State Security, is fanatically loyal to him. There are no defections from the armed forces, so he's in control. He's also someone who's heaped laud on President Bashir al-Assad, so extolled him. So he darkly indicated, yes, he would be willing to shoot down hundreds of unarmed protesters in the streets in order to retain office. I mean, just like, obviously, Assad has killed, yes, I do speak Russian, has obviously killed tens of thousands of his own civilians over the last 10 years and is only just controlling half of his own country because he is that abominated by so many people. Yes, I hold Anna Applebaum in the highest possible regard as well. I didn't realise that she was conversant in Polish too. And all right, that's enough for me. So please donate generously and subscribe to my channel. Ask me if there are any more videos you'd like me to make. And remember, I do online lessons in politics, history, French, English language, English literature, English as a foreign language, elocution, debating. And I help you with essays, dissertations, theses, and so forth, interview practice. All right, toodle pip.